The Senate chamber was silent the moment his name was spoken. Sejanus, a name that once radiated power, authority, and absolute confidence. A name that made Rome bow, and later tremble. But long before the statues were torn down and the crowds shouted for his blood, Lucius Aelius Sejanus walked the streets of Rome with a purpose that few men ever possessed. He wasn't born a prince or a patrician. He wasn't a general whose victories carved his name into marble. He was something far more dangerous. A man with ambition sharpened like a blade. Before we dive into the story, if you enjoy powerful historical documentaries like this, make sure you hit the like button right now. It tells YouTube this story deserves to be seen. And subscribe, so you never miss the rise and fall of history's most ruthless figures. Now let's begin. Sejanus came from an equestrian family, respectable, but far from noble. Rome's aristocrats didn't fear him yet. They didn't see him coming. No one did. His father served as Praetorian prefect, and when he stepped aside, Sejanus quietly stepped in as colleague and successor. At first glance, his role seemed simple. Protect the emperor, guard the city, maintain order. But Sejanus saw something no Praetorian prefect had ever seen before. The throne was vulnerable. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers sworn to defend the emperor, were scattered across the city. Different barracks, different commanders, different loyalties. A fragmented force that no single man controlled. So Sejanus changed that. He united the cohorts into one powerful camp castra, Praetoria, placing all the emperor's protectors under one roof, under one command, under him. Overnight, the Guard became the most dangerous military force inside Rome, and Sejanus held their loyalty in the palm of his hand. While other men chased glory in distant wars, Sejanus conquered the capital without marching a single legion. Tiberius, the emperor, noticed. As the years passed, Tiberius began relying on him more and more. Sejanus handled fires, crime waves, scandals, and each act won him public praise. To the people of Rome, he was the emperor's right hand. To Tiberius, he was indispensable. To himself, he was already more than that. Because Sejanus didn't simply serve the empire, he reshaped it. His ambition grew bolder. He eliminated rivals quietly, subtly, not with swords, with whispers. When Tiberius's son, Drusus, suddenly died, rumors pointed to illness. But within the shadows of ancient texts lies another story, one that claims Sejanus poisoned him. And if that accusation is true, then Sejanus didn't just remove an obstacle. He removed the man next in line for the throne. But his hunger didn't stop with Drusus. He targeted the family of Germanicus, Rome's beloved hero, exploiting their feud with Tiberius. He convinced the emperor that Germanicus's wife, Agrippina the Elder, and her sons plotted against him. Some historians believe Sejanus orchestrated the downfall of nearly the entire branch of the Julio-Claudian line, all while presenting himself as the loyal guardian of Rome. Now here is where the story becomes chilling. When Tiberius left Rome to retire on the island of Capri, he left the administration of the entire empire in Sejanus's hands. Think about that. A man with no imperial blood, no ancient lineage, no rightful claim, suddenly held the power of an emperor. And Rome felt it. Senators bowed to him. Generals obeyed him. Citizens feared him. The Praetorian Guard, thousands of elite soldiers, answered to him alone. From Capri, Tiberius watched Rome through letters. But Sejanus controlled everything in between. And then the most ambitious move of all. He sought to marry into the imperial family. He attempted to take Drusus's widow, Livilla, as his wife. A union that would have placed him inside the heart of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. A union that could make the next step undeniable, replacing the emperor. If you're watching this right now, tell me in the comments. Do you think Sejanus was a genius? Or a monster in disguise? Because history still argues over that question. But in Rome, whispers were already spreading. People began to ask, was Sejanus still serving Tiberius? Or preparing to become Tiberius? And those whispers were about to reach the emperor himself. If you're ready for what comes next, the betrayals, the exposure, and the spectacular downfall, make sure you're subscribed. Because Sejanus is about to discover something every ambitious man eventually learns. The deeper Sejanus embedded himself into the empire, the more invisible Tiberius became. From the cliffs of Capri, the emperor lived in seclusion, far away from the Senate, the citizens, and the politics that devoured Rome. He trusted letters more than people, and those letters flowed through only one man, Sejanus. Every report, every petition, every accusation passed through his hands. He filtered what Tiberius heard. He shaped what Tiberius believed. He controlled the narrative of the empire itself. And that kind of power doesn't just bend governments. It reshapes reality. To many Romans, Sejanus wasn't simply the Praetorian prefect anymore. He was the man who decided who rose and who fell. Senators stood when he entered. Commanders bowed. Families begged for his favor. The city whispered with a mixture of awe and fear. Sejanus rules Rome. But beneath that rising influence was a trail of quiet destruction. Rivals who vanished. Allies who switched sides. Imperial relatives who fell from grace one by one. Agrippina the Elder, widow of Germanicus, once the most respected woman in the empire, found herself accused of treason, ambition, immorality. Claims that many historians now believe came directly from Sejanus's designs. Her sons Nero Julius and Drusus Caesar were imprisoned. Her youngest son, Caligula, was left untouched, not because Sejanus spared him, but because Tiberius later protected him. Still, the shadow Sejanus cast over the Julio-Claudian family was unmistakable. With each downfall, the path to power became a little more open, and the Senate began to feel it. They watched him rise beyond all precedent. They watched him build a military force loyal only to him. They watched him gain control over imperial decisions. They watched him stand beside Tiberius, as though he were equal. But the moment that stunned Rome came in the year AD 31. The Senate granted Sejanus what no other man had ever received: consular powers equal to the emperor. A Praetorian prefect now shared rank with the ruler of the Roman world. To Rome, it felt like a coronation. To Sejanus, it was validation. To Tiberius, perhaps it was necessity, or fear, or manipulation. Historians still debate what the aging emperor truly understood. But one thing became clear. Sejanus was no longer trying to influence the throne. He was positioning himself to replace it. And yet, even as he stood at the height of his power, Sejanus remained restless. With Drusus dead, Agrippina imprisoned, and the heirs of Germanicus disappearing one by one, the road to succession seemed open. Rome had grown used to one simple truth. Sejanus moved, and the empire obeyed. He walked through the forum surrounded by Praetorian guards, not as a protector of the emperor, but as a man who was becoming the emperor in everything but name. People bowed. Senators lowered their eyes. Even generals treated him as the future ruler of Rome. But power has a weight, a heaviness, and eventually, even a man blinded by ambition can feel when the ground beneath him begins to change. Sejanus felt it first in the emperor's letters. The warm, trusting tone Tiberius once used had cooled. The requests grew shorter. The praise became rare. And then, the silence. For a man who controlled Tiberius's correspondence, a break in communication was like a blade pressed to his throat. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe the emperor is ill. Maybe the ships between Capri and Rome are delayed. Maybe he is simply tired. But Sejanus was too intelligent to lie to himself for long. A man who had eliminated rivals, manipulated imperial families, and executed political threats could recognize the early scent of danger. But he wanted legitimacy, blood connection, imperial marriage, something that would silence the critics forever. So he turned to Livilla, Drusus's widow, sister-in-law to the emperor. Together, they plotted. Together, they envisioned a future. Some sources claim Livilla loved him. Others say she feared him. Most agree she was willing to ally with him, even against her own blood. And for Sejanus, this alliance wasn't merely romantic. It was strategic. A marriage into the imperial family would make him a stepfather to future heirs. A union with Livilla would legitimize his rise. A child with her could eventually inherit the empire. Rome didn't know this part of the story yet, but they felt the shift, the political temperature rising, the careful balance of power twisting, the Praetorian Guard standing taller and more menacing in the streets. The question on everyone's lips was no longer hidden. Is Sejanus trying to become emperor? Supporters whispered, yes, with admiration. Enemies whispered, yes, with terror. Tiberius remained silent. And silence is always dangerous. Because while Sejanus dominated Rome, the emperor watched from Capri, isolated, aging, paranoid, and increasingly aware that the man he trusted most may have been building a kingdom within a kingdom. A Praetorian prefect becoming more powerful than princes. A commoner reshaping the imperial future. A shadow rising behind the throne. And then, suddenly, Tiberius stopped writing. For a man who controlled communication, silence wasn't absence. It was a warning. Sejanus felt it. Rome felt it. The empire held its breath. Because when an emperor goes quiet, it usually means he is preparing to strike. Meanwhile, in Capri, Tiberius sat on his cliffs overlooking the sea. No longer the passive old ruler history often paints him to be. He was listening, watching, collecting whispers. Reports filtered in, slowly, quietly, but consistently. Sejanus had grown too powerful. Sejanus had acted without permission. Sejanus had enemies removed in the emperor's name. Sejanus was being treated as the heir. One report even suggested that Sejanus hoped to marry Livilla, connecting himself to the imperial bloodline. And that was the moment. Something inside Tiberius hardened. It is one thing to serve the emperor, another to influence him, but to replace him? That was treason. Tiberius could not confront Sejanus openly. Not yet. He was too far away, too isolated, and had no idea whom he could trust in Rome. The Senate? Corrupted. The Guard? Loyal to Sejanus. The nobles? Afraid. So he did what Roman emperors did best. When cornered, he plotted. Quietly. Patiently. Ruthlessly. For months, Tiberius pretended to trust Sejanus. He sent polite letters. He made no accusations. He let Sejanus continue believing he was safe. While behind the scenes, he was engineering the perfect trap. One of Tiberius's few loyal men, the humble Naevius Sertorius Macro, was appointed as the new commander of the Praetorian Guard. Secretly, quietly, without Sejanus knowing. Macro understood the danger immediately. The moment Sejanus learned of this appointment, he would revolt. So Tiberius wrote a letter. A long, confusing, philosophical message, addressed to the Senate. It looked harmless on the outside, but its contents would determine Sejanus's fate. Then, in October of AD 31, Macro set off for Rome. While he traveled, rumors spread across the city that something monumental was about to happen. Some believed Tiberius was returning. Others feared a war. Many of Sejanus's own supporters asked him if he was certain the emperor still favored him. Sejanus dismissed every doubt. He was still Praetorian prefect, still consul, still adored by the Senate, still the man who controlled the empire. What could Tiberius possibly do? He told his allies. But that confidence was built on a lie Tiberius was about to shatter. Publicly, brutally, and without mercy. On October 18th, the Senate gathered for what Sejanus believed would be yet another ceremony honoring him. He arrived in his finest cloak, guarded by the Praetorians, greeted with bows and applause. His rise felt unstoppable. Then Macro arrived, calm, cold, carrying the emperor's sealed letter. He approached the Senate floor with deliberate steps, ignoring Sejanus entirely. He broke the wax seal, and as he read Tiberius's words aloud, the air inside the chamber shifted. The message began softly, politely, even praising Sejanus. But then, the tone changed. Line by line, Tiberius dismantled him. Accusation after accusation, crime after crime, warning after warning. The senators froze. Sejanus's face drained of color. The room filled with a silence. So heavy, it felt like the empire itself stopped breathing. And then came the final command. Sejanus is to be arrested. Just like that, Rome turned. The same senators who bowed to him hours earlier now stepped away. The same guards who had protected him now bound his hands. The same Praetorian ranks he once commanded now stood still, silent, obeying their new leader. Macro and Sejanus, the man who tried to replace the emperor, was dragged out of the Senate. In shock, humiliation, and disbelief. For the first time in years, he was powerless. Rome erupted. Crowds gathered. Enemies cheered. Allies panicked. The city trembled with the realization that the second most powerful man in the world had fallen in a single afternoon, and the purge had only just begun. The news of Sejanus's arrest spread through Rome, faster than fire through a wooden market stall. People didn't speak. They whispered. They didn't walk. They ran. Within hours, the man who once towered over Rome was locked in a cell, stripped of titles, stripped of guards, stripped of the myth he had spent a decade building. For the first time in years, Sejanus was alone. But his fall was only the spark. Tiberius had not simply removed a traitor. He had declared open season on anyone connected to Sejanus. The purge began. That same night, men who had toasted Sejanus days earlier were dragged from their homes. Women who had praised him were accused of conspiracy. Even children, the innocent, were placed on lists, marked for execution. Rome was turning into a graveyard of alliances. Sejanus's statues were pulled down and smashed in the streets. His name was hammered out from inscriptions, his honors erased, his allies hunted. It was as if Tiberius wanted the memory of this man, not just gone, but violently obliterated. But none suffered more than Sejanus's family. His eldest son tried to flee the city. He was caught, dragged back, executed. His daughter, a child, met a fate so horrific that even historians struggle to describe it. Without turning away, Roman law forbade executing virgins. So the state violated her first and then killed her. A reminder that Rome could be infinitely cruel. When fear took control, Livilla, the woman Sejanus tried to marry into the imperial bloodline, was exposed as his conspirator. She was locked away by her own mother and starved to death. The message was clear. No one was safe. No one connected to Sejanus would escape, not even in death. Would their names survive? Meanwhile, Sejanus's former supporters begged for mercy. Some hid. Some changed their allegiances overnight. Some, in desperation, accused each other of treason, simply to survive another day. Rome became a theater of paranoia. Every whisper felt dangerous. Every neighbor, a potential spy. Every friend, a possible traitor. And in the center of it all, sat Tiberius on Capri, reading every report with cold, methodical calm. This wasn't rage. This wasn't vengeance. This was calculation. Sejanus had nearly replaced him, nearly destroyed the Julio-Claudian line, nearly turned the Praetorian Guard into his personal army. So Tiberius responded by making the cost of betrayal so terrifying that no one would ever try again. But even after destroying his enemies, even after turning Sejanus into a curse rather than a name, Tiberius made one thing brutally clear: the purge would not end until the empire was cleansed of every trace of Sejanus's ambition. On October 18th, AD 31, the day of Sejanus's arrest, Rome trembled. On October 24th, just 6 days later, Sejanus was executed, dragged from his cell, stripped of dignity, stripped of everything he once used to dominate Rome. The crowd didn't just watch. They screamed. They spat. They beat him as soldiers dragged his body through the street. The same people who once bowed before him were now ripping his corpse apart in the gutter. And when the mob finished, what remained of Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the man who tried to replace the emperor, was thrown onto the Germanian stairs, left there to rot, left for dogs to tear apart, left for Rome to stare at. As a warning, the rise of Sejanus had ended in filth, disgrace, and absolute ruin. But the story was not over, because in the shadows of the purge, in the terror that followed, one question began to haunt Rome. If Sejanus could fool the emperor for so long, how many more threats were hiding inside the empire? And that question would shape the final years of Tiberius's reign, years marked by suspicion, cruelty, and a dark legacy that would stain the empire long after both men were dead. When Sejanus died, Rome tried to breathe again, but the air didn't clear. Tiberius had unleashed a storm too powerful to control. And now, everyone, senators, generals, nobles, even members of the imperial family, lived under the shadow of suspicion. Because when a ruler discovers betrayal at the heart of the empire, he begins to see betrayal everywhere. Tiberius no longer trusted his advisors, no longer trusted his family, no longer trusted the Senate he once relied upon. He trusted no one. From his villa in Capri, he governed through letters, cold, distant commands that could destroy a man's life with a single sentence. He no longer needed Sejanus, because Tiberius himself became what Sejanus once tried to be: a ruler who wielded fear like a weapon. The Senate terrified of displeasing him, became a trembling audience. Even the Praetorian Guard, once loyal to Sejanus, shifted into brutal enforcers. Executions continued long after Sejanus's death. Accusations multiplied. Trials turned into performances of fear. Rome had become a city where silence was safer than truth. But despite everything, Sejanus's ghost still haunted the empire, not literally, but in influence, in paranoia, in the fractures he left behind. Because Sejanus didn't just try to replace the emperor, he changed the way emperors thought. His story is not just about ambition. It is about the cost of power, the danger of unchecked loyalty, and the truth that even empires as mighty as Rome can be brought to their knees by one man's hunger to rule. If this story gripped you the way it gripped Rome itself, hit the like button. It helps more viewers find these documentaries. Subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into ancient power, betrayal, and the people who shaped our world. Do you think Sejanus would have made a better emperor than Tiberius, or was Rome saved by his downfall? Your thoughts help build this community of history lovers. And when you're done, watch the other documentaries on the channel, because the rise of Sejanus was only the beginning of Rome's darkest century.